I would say that there's a big incongruency with the God that we are taught in many ways, versus a God that is, which most belief systems have a God that is all loving, and yet it's a God that is vengeful, is jealous, it's dogmatic, it's chauvinistic, masochistic, all that stuff. And you have to kind of toil to get to God. Whereas a God that I saw, you didn't have to toil to, is in the innermost part of your being. You just simply have to.
Passionate about promoting healing, Jacob Cooper, best-selling author of Life After Breath and The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder, is a sought-after speaker on grief, wisdom, and consciousness, offering meditation and mindfulness seminars to help others find purpose and overcome fears of life after death. As a clinical social worker, Reiki Master, and certified hypnotherapist specializing in past life regression, Jacob uses his extensive personal and professional experience to empower one soul at a time. He hosts the weekly podcast, The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. Jacob, thank you so much. It means the world to me to have you here on my podcast with me. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Tia. I really appreciate the incredible work that you do and for the generous time and having me as your honored guest here today.
Absolutely. The pleasure is mine. So tell me a little bit about yourself.
Um, there's a lot of layers. I think each person, I made a post the other day, is, kind of like a pool with they have the shallow parts, the mid and the deep parts. And so for me, I've always been a deep swimmer. I've always been someone who's been very much about the deep end of life, and that's made my upbringing difficult, as yes, I could play the shallow stuff too and relate to kids my own age, but I was always different. And I think a lot of that certainly had to do with the childhood near-death experience at the young age of 3 years old, which I'm sure, we'll dive into a little bit more. But my passion is really helping out people. If you have a brain, you have a body. I'm very inspired to help you and meet you where you're at. And so I work, full time in the mental health field, in a psychiatric, hospital facility setting, and then have my own private practice and work with clients on some different Eastern approaches towards wellness and well-being. But, all the work that I do is really giving back the life that was given to me during my near-death experience and to give it back to those who may feel out of touch or out of connectivity to life itself, and just really being able to connect to that force. So when you do that, you recognize that that transcends not only pain, but also this body as well, is my hope.
And you touched on your professional life. What do you do professionally and what inspired you about that profession?
Yeah, I work, like I said, in the mental health field, mostly. So I work what's called as, I work as a mental health therapist. There's different uh, educational programs that you can take to become mental health therapist, get a PhD in psych or stuff like that. But for me, I went down the social work route, and I'm a what's called an LCSW, or licensed clinical social worker. So I'm clinical therapist and work with people in the mental health field. Some have higher degrees of acuity than others. Some clients come to me with some mild to moderate depression or anxiety. Some, may have history of self-harm or suicidal risks and stuff like that. And so we just try to find ways to improve their stabilization, their baseline. But beyond that, in therapy, we're all about teaching coping skills, which is basically your ability to cope with pain. And I believe in extending that more to teach people to really how to thrive, not just cope. And so I really, right now, the mental health field has changed where they're starting to, like I said, infuse a lot of Eastern philosophies such as meditation and mindfulness, and that's been infiltrated in the mental health system. And so, that's one of the things that I try to teach my clients is the power, of the breath, the power of meditation, how that could really be, um, in a way, an indicator of how deeply we're connected and our ability to transcend almost anything that comes our way through the power of connectivity, through the power of presence within our everyday lives.
And you have some books available. Tell me a little bit about Life After Breath and then your recent book, The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder.
Yeah, so these are my this is my second book, The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder, and this is Life After Breath. I wrote them within probably a 3-year span. So a two-time published author with a place called Waterside Productions. They're out in California. Um, and my agent was Bill Gladstone, who sadly passed away, and he was also the agents to the likes of Deepak Chopra, Eckhart Tolle, Neil Donald Walsh. He represented some high prolific clients. Sadly, he passed away, but you know, it was a big honor to have two published books in my low 30s. Not something that I really foresaw, because I do come from very humble beginnings. In my family, I was the worst student hands down. In community college, I was put in the lowest level of non-credited classes for reading and writing. And now, a decade or so later, I have two books out there. So it just shows you, don't be defined by what other people see your limitations as. That has more to do with their limitations than your unlimited potential. And I just tapped into something much greater than who I was, and I just moved myself out of the way and allowed these books to come out. But they've been very helpful, to a lot of people, and they've been praised by great companies such as Anita Morjani, my friend Dr. Raymond Moody, who coined the term near-death experience in the 70s, my friend Suzanne Giesemann, Dr. Gary Schwartz, to name a few. So um, they have done well, and they have helped, more importantly, help people to really understand that they are so much more than this box that we see ourselves as, that we are unlimited. And it's just a way to recall who we are and to let go of some of that amnesia that comes with the human experience. And I'm working on book number 3 right now, which is, still, processing, still in the works, but I think life is about giving back things. And so for me, I said when I die, I don't want to be put in the cemetery. I want to be put on that bookshelf if there's still libraries around with some of these authors, because to me, that's where I want to reside. Just people that could see the books, and that's what I want to be remembered by. Some people have kids. For me, I have books. Those are my kids.
I love that. And I love that you came from the humble background that you came from, but pushed through and made these books available to help others, to provide a resource, to help others heal from grief or, understand that maybe what we understand about death isn't 100% accurate. So that's amazing to me that you've done that for other folks. You had a near death experience yourself? Can you tell me a little bit about what happened?
So yeah, I was just the age of 3 years old at the time that I had my near-death experience. At the time it was September of 1993. I grew up, in the modern Orthodox Jewish tradition, so it was right before what's called the Day of Atonement or Yom Kippur, which is a time where your soul is getting itself ready to meet the Creator, and just a year of manifestation, abundance, and really righting your wrongs to have like a new slate. Um, Little did I know I was about to meet my creator, but I didn't really anticipate it to be on a direct basis. And so I went to a playground. At the time, I had something called pertussis, otherwise known as whooping cough. I went to a playground with family friends. I climbed up onto a ladder, which we'll get into, the Wisdom of Jacob's ladder, on a slide. I completely suffocated, all parts of my body were completely shut down due to this cough and my suffocation as a result of it. And then eventually my brain was deprived of oxygen so badly that it literally just snapped in half. And I felt a large, kind of thunderbolt of lightning within my brain. And once, that happened, like everything just kind of went crazy and opened up. I just ascended down this incredible familiar path of this tunnel, saw my soul elevating. I felt incredible vibrations around me. And in our bodies, we're just used to being limited with just the cap of how good we could possibly feel. And when I was, crossing over, I just knew, being out of body, there was this endless degree of love. But beyond that, it was just this, the closest word I could describe it was euphoria, where there was no possible limitation of how good and climactic I was feeling, when I was, really crossing over to the other side. My NDE really was, it's like I look at it of a tale of two cities, because some people just look at the mystical component of it, but for me, there's also an immense amount of trauma that really, you know, that I didn't know, like affected my life a lot, which we'll get into as well. But the beauty outweighed, the trauma clearly, as that's here in front of you today. And there's many gifts behind any form of trauma, and for many near-death experiencers, they fall in that same category. But I experienced, God as we know it. To me, it's just the center point of all euphoric love and creation, and where everything emanates from. And that can represent itself in different ways to near-death experiencers. To me, the allegorical symbol of it was a palace that I was seeing at the time. It was just symbology of where all of life comes from. But it's just, you can imagine if we think of vibration and imagine we're on this level being solid, and then we go to the other side, there's like this endless degree of vibration. To me, it's just the highest pitch of where all life comes from. And to me, that octave where everything comes from is, we could refer to it as God or source or creative life force, but those are words with symbols and stuff like that, but they don't justify the experiential reality of what God is. But the DNA of that was love and being understood. And then, I had, what's called Christ consciousness at the time, which was again a very high vibrational pitch on the other side. I experienced my own spiritual guides that were with me. It was a male and female guide that were with me, in my near-death experience. And they're just the most immaculate, beautiful beings you could have. I saw my body on the ground, completely irresponsive and lifeless to people trying to call me. I felt the form of myself outside of my body. I saw, endless amounts of angels in front of me that were just floating, right in front of me. I was aware of my own life review and what I did in this life and how it impacted other people. And beyond that, that life review went to what's we refer to as past life, but the other side has no time. And I was given a choice. There's autonomy, what to do and stuff like that. And obviously, I didn't chose to stay there. Otherwise, I would have a death experience or eternal life experience, as I call it, because there is no death. But I wouldn't, be here in front of you. And then yeah, it just kind of all worked itself out. But I did have premonitions of myself helping a lot of people, speaking in front of a lot of people. All those things have come to fruition. So it was a wide panoramic viewpoint of, I believe, what was always inside of each person and us, and a memory deep down that we have. And I just, near death experiences just connect to that wide panoramic view past, being in our own boxes and the solid 3D reality.
And you were practically a baby when this happened. Did it unfold for you over time, or how do you remember what happened?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's plenty of reasons as to why I would allude to having clear recall, but from a psychological standpoint, being a therapist, I could certainly say trauma could have certainly a disassociative component to it where you just try to push it away to protect yourself. And there's a complete, not a complete, but there is a forgetfulness of it. Um, some near-death experiencers completely don't remember their experience. And I have a colleague of mine by the name of Stephanie Arnold who consciously didn't remember it. And then she went to a regression therapist and it was clear recall. So it just shows you that even if you try to push away, and her experience is phenomenal. It's one of the most documented um, near-death experience that I've seen, and she has a book, I think called, is it 37 seconds, I believe, when she was clinically dead for about half a minute, and due to a pregnancy that she had, which she did predict her own death. It was documented as well. So Stephanie is a colleague of mine. But to get back on track, I would say it was always with me. It was always there. as remembered it, and I definitely think the trauma component happened to it, as well as I was connected to something beyond my linear brain, and I was connected to, my eternal mind when I had this, and there was memory there. The issue some near-death experiencers, even if they're children or adults, will come out of their experience, and the second that they're out, they'll, bang their chest and shout at the world. For myself, and plenty of other near-death experience, it's a very sacred experience, and I believe that words, couldn't really encapsulate, and they still don't, the experience that I had. So it was just kind of like a futile effort. Um, Imagine being 3 years old, so there's incongruency with what you know and what you're able to really say. The inner reality doesn't reflect the outer reality. And so when we look at any kid, we're looking at them at a very surface level. We're looking at the body, and we associate the body associated with consciousness, associated with self, with the soul. And, most kids are soul, I'm sorry, I'll rephrase that. Every child has a soul, and that soul is eternal. That soul is, a lot more knowing than most adults who have forgetfulness. So technically, yes, in one level I was a kid, but also at the same time, I was a soul with many different lifetimes and stuff like that. So I was thousands of years old, I'm sure, chronologically, that was just being seen as 3 years old, if that makes sense.
That does make a lot of sense. And how did it change you, or do you feel like you have lived a different life because of your near death experience? And was life more complicated growing up for you because you had all this wisdom and knowledge and that not everybody had?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly put the bandwidth of my near-death experience to the test because I grew up in a much different environment. I mean, I am glad for my upbringing. On one hand, I grew up in a religious, orthodox, very, kind of dogmatic environment. But with that, they were able to really have a higher value of something more, than just their house and stuff like that. So the value and the intention of something greater beyond this reality was a beautiful component and I think helpful. But again, it was a double-edged sword because it influenced just this monopolization, unidimensional viewpoint of God that was just this was the way, this was the path, and it was something outside of you. And creativity of that path or individualized connectivity to that path that goes beyond the box, wasn't seen. So it was just the systematic viewpoint, of an outer God versus a personalized connection that goes beyond a book, that goes beyond, a set belief system. And I think every religion has a kernel of truth. I firmly believe that. But, I think it becomes problematic where you start to self-abandon your own awareness, your own connectivity to something beyond a book, to something beyond something that was written by someone else. So I think if each person were to take onus of their own connectivity, we'd have a lot more people empowered and connecting to something that is, deep inside of them. And so it was hard, I grew up in a very strict family, and community where it's like you had to do this, you had to do that, you had to do that. It was like, the OC, it contributed certainly to a lot of my OCD, where it's just, the rules were like so ridiculous. But again, that was just the lifestyle. But it's very fear-based. It was just kind of like, all right, if we turn the lights on at 6:01 instead of 6 o'clock, God is going to strike us with a thunderbolt. And it's hard because deep down, where were these people getting this information from? A book, stuff like that. For me, I already saw, much further down the road from where these people, I already knew God and saw God in my own NDE. And these people are basing their connection with fear, with a book, with dogmatic kind of beliefs, whereas my viewpoint was something from an experiential level, from a knowing level. It wasn't a belief, it wasn't a faith, it was a knowing. And so for myself, the knowing component was always the North Star of how I navigated my life. I didn't put stock in belief or faith. It was to me all about direct experience that determined my reality.
And what are some of the lessons and cultural myth that you learned in your near death experience?
So much. I mean, I think again, we have this box of identity, and some you could call that the ego, which some will say, edging God out. But beyond that, we all have God in us, which is this guiding, organized design. And I think for a lot of us, each one of us has a spark of infinity of divinity, as I call it. And each person, I think, has to understand that they are so much more than what they think. They are so much more connected to what they understand. And my near-death experience was a reminder, like, oh shit, like I'm not just this body. I'm not just Jake. I'm not, I experience all these things, but my connectivity is to a much greater reality. And there's a higher design beyond that, a reason for everything. And that's kind of the way science is. Science is, if you look closely enough at things, there's an explanation for almost anything. And my near-death experience really took away just this random viewpoint that some people have where they feel they're just dropped here from the wound and just here to pay the bills, here to have a job, here to have, the hot wife or the hot husband, have kids, and that's just kind of your life. And while all those things are great, that the checklist is great, it doesn't lead to contentment. And I think if you are following this cultural myth of all the things that you're told that you're supposed to do to be happy, you end up probably seeing me in my office years down the road because you just find it's not sufficient. And you just have to ask why that is. And I think a lot of people look for reality and look for life outside of themselves instead of connectivity to a beautiful symphony of joy within. And I think if more people were to able to connect or remember what's in their backyard is really what they're trying to find, and that connection to the inner self and our infinite reality, they'd be a lot more happier. And all these things wouldn't be, dependent on our own happiness. They'd just be experiences and further expansions of that deep part of ourselves. So I think a lot more people are disconnected. They live outside in versus inside out, and that leads to a lot of issues. But yeah, just this concept of the self that we're taught. We're taught, hey, you're this gender, you're this name, you're this, you're that, but you're not that, you're not that, you're not that. And so we just start to just put ourselves in a very small box with how other people see us. And that's sense of belief has such a big pivotal role in our behaviors. And you look at people right now, if their belief of God is a God that unites us all, I think people try to find God in other people versus some who says, this is my God, so there's a monopolization of God, and people will do everything they can to put away any threats of people who might have a similar monopolization of God so that they have the VIP seat, and just becomes a war of who could have further monopolization of God. But it's kind of like trying to cut up air and thinking you're doing something. You can't, there's enough pie to go around of God for us all, and it's not one group or one people. And that's something certainly that was incongruent with my upbringing. We just grew up, feeling like we're the chosen ones, we're the chosen people. That's just was what was programmed from day one. And I think we are all God's people. And I had my near-death experience in a playground, and there's certainly a lot of symbology of it, but I was just a child in a playground. And when you think of a playground, what do you think? You think of a child in a playground. And what's a child in a playground? It's brothers and sisters keeper, just there to enjoy, to celebrate this infinite reality. And so the playground, in many aspects, has played a big role in my life, during my NDE and post my NDE, which hopefully I have time to get into that analogy and how God has maybe a sense of humor too.
Near death experiences hold a very special place in my heart
Right.
outside of being a catalyst for raising the vibration of the planet, for waking people up, for changing the way that we live our lives, for knowing more about life and death and the afterlife. Can you expand on some of the lessons, in particular, how they can help those who are grieving?
Yeah, no, it's a wonderful question, and I'm so glad that you're the living embodiment that yes, it's possible to experience the lowest abyss of life and to have NDEs as a part of your grief journey. As they really do research studies on this, and they find that there's a big association with those who believe in something more than this reality and their ability to grieve. And grief is not eliminated from the human component. I want to be very clear that there's a very real and raw psychological component of grief that's hardwired, that's necessary. I do believe the way out of grief is through grief, and you have to kind of still go through. But I think it could be expedited and lessened when you are able to really know, hey, this box that I have of where I think my loved one, this empty void that I may have that they may be 6 feet under, is not true, is a myth. And then I'm finding my own conclusivity through maybe my own direct experience or going to evidential medium or seeing, like a guy like myself talking about near-death experience, that it is possible that we are not just all this body, that this body is not all that connects us. And there's maybe a part of ourselves that goes beyond the body that could connect beyond the body, even within this lifetime. And so I think it really allows um, a myth of death, because what does really death mean? It means a complete stoppage, a complete ending. Well, if you're having a continual relationship with a loved one or an understanding that the loved one goes on, that's continuity. That's not death. That's a continual relationship, and it unfolds in different, in some ways more magnified ways. And so I found through my work, on a macro and micro basis, working on a group level as well as individual counseling, that those who do find their own conclusivity and their own belief systems, that there's more than this reality in the body, tend to do better. But again, it's really like my friend Dr. Raymond Moody and Mark Anthony says, it's really about having a degree of evidence of eternity. I went to jury duty yesterday, and it's just, I was thinking the whole time how the afterlife is kind of like that, where you're giving different anecdotal stories or different experiences, and each person to their own abilities has to determine, all right, is this, give me a vote of confidence that there is eternity? Is this something real, or is this maybe something that is not real? And I think each person has to really take pieces of evidence and determine if it's valid piece of information or not. And I think each person has the ability to do that. But I think people are gravitating this more and more because there's something quite familiar about all this stuff. When near-death experiencer talks and speaks about these things, there's a kernel of recollection that comes into many participants who hear these things that just say, wow, I may not know exactly what you're saying, but there's something familiar about what you're talking about, and that kind of point builds and it grows and expands, and, eventually a transformation could be quite profound. And so while it doesn't eradicate the pain that we go through, it could allow us to have, just a helpful guide and helpful resource to transform, looking at death, just as I did in my near-death experience, as just this complete ending, to looking directly at it and to see the light of eternity past that thick veil of darkness that comes with one's passing.
And near death experiences have changed or helped us at least to open our minds up to exploring religion or looking at religion through a different lens. And so, what is or who is God to you, and do we have a purpose?
All great questions. And I don't like talk out of my whatever. I talk whatever I say is really based on my connection and my near-death experience. So again, the God that I saw wasn't a condemning God, wasn't a God that, just kind of struck me as a thunderbolt. It was love, it was acceptance, it was complete, nurturing, and it was a God that loved me for not what I did, but who I was. And who I was will be, is a divine spark of spiritual being that's eternal. And so, how could God hate itself if we all are, sparks of divinity? So, I think there's a big projection on our life experiences that's put onto God. I think God, in many ways, is seen as like a sheriff or a police officer or a parent that we had, where for us, we're just not used to someone loving us for who we are. we're so programmed to conditional love. We get the great grade on the test, we feel good about ourselves. We get the bad grade ourselves, there's reprimandation. And that, is this reality. Two things could be true at the same time. This reality, that is a governing principle. But in the larger, spiritual reality, that's not a reflection of God. We at our core are perfect just as we are. There's nothing that we need to do or be. We just seek to have expansion. We seek to have further ways to experience that divine perfection in its different forms and different stories and different lifetimes. So I would say that there's a big incongruency with the God that we are taught in many ways versus a God that is, which most belief systems have a God that is all loving, and yet it's a God that is vengeful, is jealous, it's dogmatic, it's chauvinistic, masochistic, all that stuff. And you have to kind of toil to get to God. Whereas the God that I saw, you didn't have to toil to, is in the innermost part of your being. You just simply have to remove all of those preconceived notions. I am not good enough to connect to God, or someone else has that connection, but I don't. That's reserved for a special VIP member. So each person has their own connectivity and their own GPS system to connect to the guiding organized design, as my friend Suzanne Giesemann refers to as God. It's just this part of us that's ingrained in our DNA, who we are.
And tell me more about past lives and how do you work with people regarding their past lives?
Yeah, I mean, past life regression therapy is a form of hypnosis that I have, and hypnotherapy works with memories that go beyond just this conscious mind. It goes and connects the subconscious, mind, which has memories and storehouses of experience that go beyond past our immediate awareness. What got me into past life regression was really post NDE. Yes, I saw past lives in my near-death experience, but as a kid, I kept on having all these visualizations and memories. And sometimes the disc on my current life would go to a different track of a past life. And it was just, to me, it was hard to like stay on track of this life, and that speaks to, again, our language. We say past lives, it speaks to linearity. And, just something that bugs people out is there is no time. And so it's not, in one way, yes, you could say it's a past, but another way, there is no past, present, or future. It's just like, cutting up air. You think you're doing that, but really you're not changing anything. It's just eternity. So in our system, we just divide everything to just structural time and, dates and calendars. And, that's what we're doing. But at the end of the day, all that, it's kind of blown up because recognize, geez, there's only eternity. There's no uh, marcation of time. It's all a big illusion and a creation of a human construct that we have that's irreflective of the ultimate reality. But to me, past lives is a way to give back to people who maybe not have not had a near-death experience, or maybe people who might be grieving, or maybe people who are curious as to who they were, maybe some people who have blockages, or they want to know a little bit more about the self. But the number one thing that when I have a successful past life regression client, when they're able to really go deep into it, is just the knowing that we are more than this reality. We are more than our bodies, but more importantly, we don't die. As people experience their own lives, their own deaths, and they continue, so it gives them an inner knowing, um, of a direct experience that they just can't deny. So yeah, it's just another way to kind of empower people to really remember this truth without needing to go through all the suffering that I and some other near-death experiencers have had, because yes, it does come with a lot of suffering, complexity, trauma. And so I think near-death experiences are, in many ways, they're sacrificial in some degree, because, we go through those things not for ourselves, but really to really give over to other people as well, too, so that they could remember this. And we're just gentle taps of the shoulder for things that people already know.
Shifting gears, how do you incorporate your experience into your professional work now?
My professional work, it's there's always a tightrope that I have, but I find things are changing. I mean, for instance, who coined the term near-death experience? None other than Dr. Rim Moody. What was his degree in? He had a doctorate in philosophy as well as psychiatry. So, and you look, so why I'm saying that is the man worked in the mental health field and he coined, this term. So it gives a lot of credibility, but it also really speaks to the notion that this is something that is respected by people in the medical and scientific community, and it's not out there. What I do right now is I try to train other professionals in the mental health field truly understand a lot of these phenomenon, and my analogy is this: clients are coming to you, they may have their experience, there may be no one that they know that understands it, they may be gaslit, they may be invalidated, they may be told they're crazy, or maybe they're told, hey, let's put you in inpatient because you look like you're having a psychotic break or psychotic episode. So there's a lot of that's there. And some of that, is valid. I think some of the things that happen is not always a psychic experience. Sometimes it could be a psychotic experience. And I think you have to kind of know the difference. I think if it's very threatening, if it's just dark energy, if it's stuff like that, it tends to probably be more of a psychotic episode. But if it's uplifting, if it's non-distressing, if it's a beautiful thing that you're experiencing or describing, you know, to me, that has more to do with God and the afterlife. If it's not loving, if it's not beautiful, it's probably not God. It's not the afterlife. So it's somewhere kind of that in between stage where, um, many people have things called distressing near death experiences where I firmly believe if it's a distressing near-death experience, it wasn't a full experience. It's like saying, "Hey, I experienced Singapore, but I went to the airport and that's where I hung out." I mean, went to the airport in Singapore, but you might not have gone to full Singapore itself. So, it's just one very small entry-level layer on the continuum of a near-death experience prior to the full crossing over experience. But I do train professionals, in understanding NDEs, out-of-body experiences, shared death experiences, spiritual transformative experiences, lucid visions, deathbed visions, all this stuff that may come into clients because they may feel like they're drowning. And as professionals, who are we to put their heads further underwater? We are to be those solid pieces of wood for them to hold on to and eventually help them come up to the surface and get back on land and make sense of this all. So, um, I'm educating, through groups, what's called continuing educational hours of just helping other fellow therapists understand these things as being very possible, very real, but also with the ability to understand, to have some background when clients may come with these things, to not look at them as crazy and to really find ways to validate versus invalidate. So that on a professional level is what I'm doing. And in addition, I do a lot of mindfulness, stuff. I do a lot of breath work. Certainly when I was suffocated and I had my near-death experience, I saw that my human breath was taken away, but I surrendered to that and I connected to the breath of eternity. And so for me, the breath is so pivotal in this life is really, it's our connection to life itself. The deeper the breath, the deeper our connectivity to life is.
What inspired you to write your books? Your near-death experience happened so long ago, and you've been kind of chucking through life and learning from it and watching the unfoldment. So, when it was time, what inspired you?
Well, there's many angles, but certainly there's some people in life that are givers and takers. And I think to give, you need to take. You can't just, give. You can't pour from an empty cup. But for myself, there was a whole deal of taking that I got from plenty of givers and people who were prominent thought leaders and influenced my path, probably my later teens and early 20s. And for me, it was just my way of giving back to what I was provided to, and I just go through all these, spiritual books and libraries. And it allowed me for the first time to validate my experience and just seeing this universality, but seeing, a higher North Star that helped guide my experience. But beyond that, you know, the job, I guess, in my near death experience is yes to talk about the afterlife, but also to remember the life that I was given and shown, and to try my best in any way I can to give that back to others who are going through moments of emotional suffocation or deprivation from life force itself. And my hope is that these books could really infuse a sense of just spark in people and to have them to really connect to a greater reality. And I think we've all experienced this to some degree where we have this dark night of the soul and maybe you're reading the book, The Dark Night of the Soul, um, but you're but you're in that moment, and then just pick up a book or you tune into a podcast, and all of a sudden that piece of information totally shifts your experience. And so, yeah, when we change our information, we could change the way we look at things. And when we change the way we look at things, as Wayne Dyer would say, the things we look at will change. So information is that first step to really changing our outlook. Therefore, that could change our behaviors, and worldviews.
That is my favorite Wayne Dyer quote, by the way. I love it. And it has been very impactful in my life. I've put it to practice.
Now, yeah, he's amazing. I have a very strong connection with him, certainly on the other side. And a lot of people that have come in my path have had, very close personal relationships or connections on the other side with him as well. But I could firmly understand that in your connection. Sometimes we look at the surface of things, but what we don't understand is what goes beyond that and just the iceberg. And this was a man who was in and out of the orphanages, I believe, as a child in the Michigan area. And he said, I was the richest kid in the orphanage because I guess I had the best attitude or something like that. So from a young age, he was always understanding that the inner reality is the reality. It's not so much our circumstances, but what we make out of them. And so, but I also think through the power of forgiveness that he was able to have, I think his father was, maybe like an alcoholic or abusive or stuff like that. And the moment that he pulled over to the side of the road, went to his cemetery, started to forgive him, was when a lot of things opened up and he kind of let go of, all that pain and just who am I to judge? Who am I to hold on to these things? And he understood maybe his role as an actor on this stage rather than at face value.
Religion permeates the majority of people's lives.
Mm.
What is the difference between religion and spirituality, if there is one?
Yeah, I think religion is more so something that we're taught, conditioned to or programmed to. It's something external. Spirituality is who you are and the life that you live. I think a lot of people get caught up in religion or spirituality. I'm just kind of sitting there and meditating or sitting there and praying. These are spiritual practices, but those are hopefully practices to help you to live more. And I think the ultimate spirituality is the lives that we live itself and the experiences that we have, the relationships that we have. To me, that is the definition of spirituality. My second book, the front endorsement is by a colleague and friend of mine, Alison Dubois, who was the inspiration of that hit, ABC show called, NBC show called Medium, which is, many, many hits, is based on her life as a medium, what that was like. But she has this wonderful saying that, and she wrote a book on it, kind of like we are their afterlife, meaning the lives that we live are our loved ones' afterlife. But what we create here, she always says, influences our afterlife. And so, everyone wants to focus on what's to come, but what they don't understand, the lives that you live influences your afterlife. And that's why you see, like, when people go to like an Alison Dubois or just another medium, your loved one is doing a lot of the similar stuff that they did over here. So for me, myself, my grandfather loved fishing, and every reading he comes through with a fishing rod and he says he's doing that. So, it's I don't think we should short circuit or diminish the our passions, our hobbies, our interests, the things that we love here, because those are the things that we will do when we carry over. So you want an interesting afterlife. You want a life that's afterlife that's full of experiences, live here, because that will enhance your afterlife and what you're drawn to. Um, so there's a correlation, many times of that love continues, and love here is love over there too.
For those of us who have not had a near death experience, how can we access what you say is the higher consciousness?
Yeah, in the front part of my book, there's a quote by Thich Nhat Hanh that says, "The quieter we become, the more we could hear." And I think for us, we're taught that more is better. We have more cars, more houses, more money, more this, you're better. And what we know is that doesn't lead to that. From a spiritual perspective, less is more. So the less interference, getting out of your own way, you're just kind of surrendering to things, not taking yourself too seriously or this life too seriously in many ways, being in joy. And it's all about vibrations. So you think of the other side, it's a very high vibration. If we're, very much into this 3D illusion or holding on to these heavy things, the other side will always be the other side, but we won't be able to meet it where it's at. And so by being able to elevate our energies through love, through joy, through experience, through a positive mindset, through taking care of our bodies and our lives, and everything's connected, we will really have a stronger connection to it. So certainly could go to intuitive, psychic development courses. Great. I think that's great. But I think really it's learning how to radiate your own joy, learning how to, be in alignment with joy. I had a profound out of body experience probably 2 decades later after my near death experience in the same month of September. And looking back on it, I think a lot of it had to do with just my ability to just look at this life and look at how seriously we take things, look at it directly in the face and say, it's the funniest thing on earth with how seriously we take things. And I just hysterically laughed for, a long period of time. It wasn't just a haha, this is funny kind of thing. Every fiber of my being was just squeezing out when I laughed. And I could feel just all the pain relieving me. And then all that density just left me. I just was left with who I was, which was, I went from solid to a gas, and all of my just intensity of the body just left. And I was there for several weeks out of my body. But what I'm saying is sometimes we just have to be able to reframe all this density that we have and all the things that we think are so serious and so real. Um, and it's not. So if it's not in love, it's not in light, it's not in just joy, it's probably our own creations. It's not alignment with the ultimate truth.
You've put together so many resources for people. You have your podcast, your YouTube channel. You work with others in helping them to become more knowledgeable. You've got two books currently published and working on a third. What comes next?
Yeah, I mean, there's a colleague of mine, Jeff Olson, who I heard him saying, like, I don't know what's around the corner, but I know that there's no ending. And so for myself, that's kind of like that. I'm just kind of uncertain as to what exactly is there, and that is exciting. But for myself, and I think for viewers, to really make an impact, you have to come from a place of love and service. To me, that's the embodiment of God, is connecting to love and connecting to service. And so I just kind of declared that. I said, God, just use me as thy instrument wherever I could be used to help another soul to brighten this world. Just kind of put me there. So I surrender to that. I mean, sure, I'm a go-getter and I try to network with people, and it doesn't just happen to you like Rapunzel's hair, going down, from the tower. You have to go out and get it. But for myself, I also believe in this guiding organized design and this flow of life. And so you're meant to go where you go. But yeah, I'm gonna be presenting at organizations such as Helping Parents Heal, the conference in Phoenix, Arizona. You have, over 1,000 participants there. It's a big conference. So I'm gonna be there in August. I'm also gonna be on Forever Family Foundation. They are an organization that was started similarly to Helping Parents Heal. They were also featured on Netflix's Surviving Death, but they do retreats. Basically, the director Robert Ginsburg tragically lost his daughter in a motor vehicle accident, was attending grief groups. People were not allowed to talk about afterlife experiences, and so all these people would just gather in their parking lot, talk about signs and symbols. He goes, you know what? I'm just going to start to create a group and make something of this. But we're able to allow that, and so that led to Helping Parents Heal, where they have evidentially tested mediums and scientists and people like myself, near-death experiencers, to just kind of generate the hope and the knowing past the pain. And what we see is incredibly transformative with a lot of the participants who walk in, with high degrees of acute grief and loss and suffering, to see them, maybe feeling a little bit lighter, a little bit brighter towards the weekend end. And that's all I could ask for. So, um, but yeah, I mean, we'll see. TV I have a documentary that I have coming up that I'm featured on, in December. So media stuff, is coming, but each moment at a time.
If my viewers had more questions, they wanted to purchase your book or watch your YouTube channel, how can they find you?
The best way to probably find all things that I provide is my website. It's jacoblcooper.com. That's jacoblcooper.com. There you could find, my book on Amazon, my books rather on Amazon, my YouTube channel, also on Facebook and Instagram. I try to do daily inspirational messages and content to really give life to the world and, and generate inspiration, which I now know is the oxygen of our times.
And I'll put some links down below if anybody wants to find you. They can easily click on those links. And do you have any last words of wisdom for my viewers?
What I would say is, first of all, thank you for tuning into Tia's channel. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, like button, share, because Tia's got a great channel. But beyond that, what I would say is to continuously be curious with who you are, to continuously expand the box of reality, of eternity as you know it. Having a near-death experience does not give me the monopolization of the afterlife. It was just a brief preview and outlook and recollection to how much more we are. So may each day you wake up more conscious, more aware, more expanded than when you went to sleep that night before. Otherwise, what's the point of living, the next day if you're not continuously expanding that box? Hope that makes sense.
Complete sense. And I love that. Very wise words. Thank you so much, Jacob, for being my
Thank you.
guest. It's been an absolute pleasure to spend this time with you.
An honor. Thank you so much for your good work.
Thank you for being here. I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you being here and supporting my channel. If you haven't already subscribed, please consider subscribing if you enjoy near death experiences and other spiritually transformative stories. It helps the algorithm know that this information is useful and push it out to more people. And that's the goal, to get as many people to know that we are eternal spiritual beings and that we never die. Our bodies might die, but our essence will never die. And I want people to live with less fear. Let's all spread the word. Like, comment, subscribe, share, hit that little notification bell so you get all the notifications when my videos post. Thank you for all of your support. I'm sending love to you.